Hello YouTube, it's Charlie in Westeros, and I'm back once again with my weekly Game of Thrones episode reviews. Today I will be reviewing Game of Thrones Season 4, Episode 5, entitled First of His Name. As always, my reviews are spoiler-free, so there are no spoilers from the books in these reviews. If you are interested in checking out my reviews that I will be doing with a few other YouTubers, you can, which do contain spoilers, you can check them out at my friend James Johnson's channel. I'll put a link to that channel in the comment section below. And we will be doing it on Wednesday, likely at 8 p.m. So if you want to check us out live, then you're more than welcome to come. Again, they are spoiler friendly, so do not go there, of course, if you have not read the books or do not want anything spoiled for you for the show. Last but not least, unfortunately, I am all alone doing my reviews today. My friend Pronica, who did the review with me last week, is gone home to India now, which is very sad because she always has great insights for the show, so we won't get any more reviews from her, at least not for another 2 months if I do make any more videos pertaining to Game of Thrones episode reviews after that. So without further ado, let me get right into reviewing this episode. So I think the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that the episode is entitled First of His Name. Obviously, this is a reference to the fact that not Joffrey, that Tommen is now crowned king, Tommen the first of his name. I personally also feel that this episode refers to something much broader, however. It refers to the fact that we were reminded of those events which occur in the first season. So maybe it's a bit of a stretch to see it that way, but I mean, there's so many events in this season, in this episode, that, you know, remind us of those things that occurred in season 1, such as, you know, we're reminded about Robert Baratheon and his role as a king. We're reminded of Lysa Tully, of course, who comes back finally in the series after 3 seasons of not being there. Various things from season 1 are touched upon again, you know, the fact that Arya wants to kill the Hound, Sandor Clegane, because of, you know, what he did to her friend, I think in the 2nd episode of the 1st season. And there was something else as well I can't seem to remember. Oh, of course, the major event which, you know, gets the whole series going, that is to say the letter that Catelyn gets from her sister stating that the Lannisters were the ones who killed Catelyn's sister's husband, Jon Arryn, which of course we found out in this episode is not the case. So again, a lot of major things we are reminded of from the 1st season taking place in this specific episode. So, without further ado, I want to address the events in this episode based on location. So let me talk about the things occurring at King's Landing. So, of course, we have Tommen's coronation, and it's really interesting because in this scene, for I think the first time ever, we have Margaery and Cersei actually getting along. And it's interesting because even throughout this whole episode, Cersei really seems to be getting along with everyone she normally, you know, has some kind of little bit of animosity towards. So it was quite interesting to see that. It's interesting also that Cersei seems resigned in her fate to marry Loras Tyrell, which is quite interesting, and she didn't seem to react much when Margaery brought that up, which was really surprising because usually she jumps down Margaery's throat at every chance she gets. So I think this is a sign that Cersei is plotting something. We don't know what entirely, but clearly, you know, something's a little bit amiss with that character. Now again, this season, like I said, was a reminder of those events in season 1, but it was also a very peaceful episode that had a lot of, you know, conclusions occurring, or at least a lot of things being resolved, which was really neat. And I also think that even though these things occurred, it's in a slight way a bit of a reminder that, you know, things are going to get crazy real soon because this is Game of Thrones and, you know, nothing ever stays calm for long. After that first scene, we also have another scene with Cersei, and this time her father Tywin, and, you know, there was some more reminiscing here about Robert Baratheon, like I mentioned, and, you know, how Tywin funded him, and more importantly, now we find out that the Lannisters don't really have much gold, i.e. they have none at all, because the gold mines in the Western lands, or the Lannisters, you know, crown lands, or I don't know how to say this, their own personal lands, have ran out of gold mines, which is problematic because now they need the Tyrells to help pay back the Iron Bank of Braavos. And I thought this was interesting because once more we have the Iron Bank of Bravos, or Bravos in general, being brought up. And they've done this every episode this season, so I think, this is a region or a city that we're going to really see and hear from very soon in many ways. They're going to be very, very important, and I was a bit surprised they talked about the Iron Bank of Bravos in this context, considering we didn't have a scene from Stannis, who, at least indirectly intends to use the Iron Bank via Davos, who wrote them in Stannis' name. But anyway, I'm diverging into things that happened in the past, so I will remain firmly to discuss things that happened in this episode. We also understand that without the Tyrells, the Lannisters are pretty much screwed, and I think Cersei, in a sense, is starting to understand this, because in her discussion with Tywin, we understand that, because they have no gold, they have to really rely on their biggest rivals, ironically enough. And I think this is a fact that, Tywin probably doesn't want to let the Tyrells know, because, of course, that's a huge, huge, huge factor that they could use against the Lannisters in vying for power, so to speak, in very covert ways, of course. So I'm interested in seeing where that goes. But I think the most interesting part of the scene, not including discussion of the Bank of Bravos, is this whole idea that Tywin is still obsessed with Lannister unity and how it's important that the family stays together. And I think for once I really agreed with Cersei here, because she pretty much points out that they're totally divided. We have Jaime, who basically renounced his Lannisterness by being the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. That means he can't marry or have any kids, and he gives up all his claims on Casterly Rock, which is the Lannisters' homeland, so to speak. And of course we have Tyrion in prison, who is accused of murdering Joffrey. And I do wonder if that last line that Cersei said to Tywin, I guess indirectly regarding her brother, is going to affect Tywin's decision in how he treats Tyrion during the trial. Like I said, we are always reminded that Tyrion values this family unity in the Lannisters, but I think that unity is starting to get chipped away slowly but surely. So I'm really, really curious as to how they're going to handle that in the future. At least that's the vibe I got. Again, later on, we have another scene with Cersei yet again, and this time Oberyn. And again, for a third time, we have her interacting with a character that normally she doesn't seem to get along with, or there's always some kind of feud or bickering. But this time, they're totally bonding for really interesting reasons. I mean, they're talking about both of their dead relatives. It's also, I think, personally good to know that Myrcella is doing fine in Dorne. But otherwise, I think the scene really stands out for the fact that things are, again, temporarily peaceful right now, and I think dark times are coming. Episode 5 is the middle of the season. There's 10 episodes in each season, so I think this was kind of not to say it's a mid-season finale, but it kind of acts as a midpoint to understand how things are going and where things are going with the series. With the season and with the series, as I just said, in the broader sense, that I think that maybe I'm overreaching this, but I kind of feel that this episode specifically was a bit of a midpoint for the whole series, because I could totally see them doing maybe 9 seasons for this, and if this is the middle of season 4, then I guess it's kind of the midpoint, or close to the midpoint for the whole series, which would be interesting, because now we're getting this reaffirmation of where things stand right now. And of course where things stood at the beginning, and we have this mystery of where things are going to progress, which is of course intriguing to us, the viewers, because I'm really curious to what's going to happen in the future. Anyway, enough of my blabbering. I want to move on to the next scene or region in this episode, and that is events taking place in Essos, i.e. Slaver's Bay, where Daenerys is. I gotta say, I thought it was neat that Daario took the Navy for Daenerys. There's a few boat references in this episode too. We have this one I'm just bringing up now, where Daario took the Navy of Marine for Daenerys, in order for her to go, quote unquote, home, to go back to Westeros. And in the scene prior that I was talking about, although it occurred later on in the episode, where Cersei requests Oberyn bring her daughter Myrcella a gift of a ship from King's Landing to Dorne. And, it's kind of an expression of Cersei's love for her daughter and of a reminder of what her home was or is. So I guess it was interesting how, the boat image kind of served as an attachment to the home or the familial in many ways. And ironically enough, it also kind of reminds us, the viewers, that these two characters, even though we don't see Marcel in the season, or this episode, sorry, we are reminded, that she is in another land. She is, living her life in Dorne now, and she's trying to adapt to that culture, and just how she's probably getting along well in Dorne, as Oberyn stated. Daenerys in Marine, i.e. the slaver cities, or the ex-slaver cities in this case, she's starting to want to make a foothold here, and she makes that statement by the end of this scene. But before I get into that, I also feel the need to say that, Daenerys asserts her uncertainty for a change, which is kind of nice because, we find out that the first city she sacked, i.e. where she first obtained the Unsullied, they overthrew the council that she put up, that she imposed there, she created to rule the city. This wise council has been deposed by a butcher named Cleon, and of course, she doesn't seem too pleased at that event. And then in the other city, Yunkai, the last city that she conquered at the end of season 3, the Masters have reasserted their power because, of course, there weren't enough Unsullied, or the forces of the Unsullied and slaves weren't strong enough to withstand the Masters reasserting their claim, which is quite interesting because now we have Daenerys, basically stating that, if I can't even rule 3 cities, how the hell am I going to rule 7 frickin' kingdoms? So I feel that, in a way, maybe this is Daenerys having a test run of rulership by staying here. But it could also mean that maybe she intends to stay here forever. I mean, it all depends where she goes and how you read this. I would personally like it if she went back to Westeros because I think that's where she deserves to rule. And I am, of course, Team Dany from the Targaryen poster you see there and Her Majesty behind me. One more thing that was interesting about her position in the scene is that, recently we've been getting a lot of her not showing much inner emotions. She's been very cold, trying to rule like a man, be strong, be very, very unemotive, very unrelatable for us, the viewers, I felt. And I think it's interesting because, we haven't seen the dragons in quite a few episodes, and I think the last time that we saw the dragons, when she's petting them, we see a little bit of her emotional side. And since then, she's been very ice cold, very, very Targaryen dragon emotive theory like, which is interesting. And I don't think this is entirely a CGI choice. They don't want to. I don't think they just want to save money on not having the CGI for the dragons. But I think it also kind of is representative of her own emotional state. The fact that her dragons aren't there kind of symbolizes her not truly being herself. Not truly being honest with her emotions and how she maybe feels. And I definitely got the sentiment reaffirmed by the end of the episode when Jon, of course, is reunited with Ghost, but I will get into that in a bit because first I want to talk about events in the Vale. So again, another character we haven't seen in such a long time, like I mentioned. We have Sansa and Littlefinger reaching the Vale, and she's publicly supposed to pretend to be his nephew, or his niece, his niece, getting all my wording confused, by the name of Elaine Stone, so people won't know that she is Sansa Stark, and nobody will report it to the Lannisters. Now, the castle in the Vale of Arryn, which is called the Eyrie, is very stunning. Again, I've missed seeing that beautiful piece of work since season 1. I do think it's interesting that Peter Baelish brought up how hard it is to invade the Eyrie, and how it's never been done in like 1,000 years. But of course, he's omitting one very important fact, and that is that the Targaryens obviously took over that land at some point, thanks to their dragons. Since, narrow passageways, as he mentioned, can't really stop dragons, clearly. So I do wonder if his omission was intentional, or maybe that's just, my inner Team Targaryen coming out and speaking in defense of the Targaryens in this specific instance. I was a little surprised with how easily Sansa's Aunt Lysa felt, safe talking about Sansa's true identity so openly, and even to her son, who, he's a cute kid, but he's clearly, a little bit slow. He was breastfeeding at such a late age. I think there's a lot going on there. And also considering she had a maester ready to marry her and Peter Baelish right outside the doors when she was openly talking about that, is interesting because, she's admitting, and then she admits to us, the audience, about how she was the one who wrote to her sister Caitlyn about the Lannisters killing her husband, and now, like, we find out that she's the one who actually killed her husband, is, like, shocking. You would think that she'd have bit more self-control in terms of revealing too much information that could ruin her plans, but especially what seemed to be Peter Baelish's plans, because clearly he is, I think, the puppet master behind all that. And I think he kind of got that vibe a little bit when he kissed her to shut her up at that one point, because she was going on and on and on, revealing this important information to us, the audience, and possibly even to people around them. I don't know, but yeah, she's kind of dangerous, and she's clearly not all emotionally that stable. Now I think it's completely messed up, but it's so interesting because now that we know Lysa is pretty much the person, via Peter Baelish, who sparked the entire warfare and madness that's happening in this series. It's interesting that this character, who we kind of assume is going to be good for Sansa and Arya, doesn't seem all that stable or all that safe in the end, which is so weird because, you'd think family is supposed to be home and safety to you, but clearly it's not the case in many cases, and that doesn't just include the Lannisters for Tyrion, but it also includes Sansa and assumedly Arya when it comes to their aunt Lysa, who is supposed to be their flesh and blood, so to speak. Other than that information, I think it's, kind of funny. We also learned that she is totally obsessed with Peter Baelish, and also she's a bit of a major screamer, which was kind of funny, I gotta say. Later on, we also have a really weird scene actually, between Sansa and Lysa, and we truly find out just how much bitterness and anger she has towards her sister, i.e. Sansa's mother, and again, how messed up she is in the end. What's more interesting is that we find out that Lysa also plans to marry Sansa to her own son Robin and make Sansa the Lady of the Vale. Now, this is interesting because in a weird way, it puts Sansa in a position of power if, this plot does succeed. Because, of course, her husband, or her potential husband, Sweet Robin, is kind of weakly seeming. And I think it would also, in a negative sense, alert the Lannisters that Sansa is alive and well and, with her family in the Vale. And this could also spark another war, potentially, if, the North finds out that Sansa is safe and well in this part of the world, then they could also rally behind her. And if she's not married to Tyrion any longer, if he's found guilty, that is, and if he's executed, although I really hope that's not the case, but if that were to happen, then, another war could brew. And of course, as we all know, winter is coming, just as we learned in the very first episode of the first season. One thing that I kind of found slightly off-putting, although it's not that surprising, given the universe Game of Thrones is set in, is the fact that Sansa would be marrying her first cousin. On top of that, it seems like there are quite a few young women in this episode who are being married off to even younger boys. We have Marjorie and Tommen, and of course Sansa and Little Robin, Lysa's son. Assuming, of course, both of these plots or intentions succeed. The next couple locations I want to talk about are the Riverlands with Arya and the Hound, and also with Podrick Payne and Brienne. Now, I kind of want to talk about these scenes together because there's a lot going on here that I felt runs in tandem between these two sets of characters. I felt that, Brienne and Podrick's scene, of course, stands in stark contrast with Arya and the Hounds in a sense. Not only because we have an adult, powerful figure with a younger figure, kind of in training, but, we have their genders reversed, which is interesting to say the least. And it also affects the way they interact. We have Arya being stubborn and difficult and trying to train and become a fighter, with, the Hound being so patient, but in the end just schooling her and putting her in her place. And then, of course, we have Podrick Payne trying to serve Brienne, but in this case, she's the one giving him a bit of a hard time and not being so easy on him. But in the end, she does more or less acquiesce and gets a little nicer on him anyway. So, again, I think this is an interesting dynamic between these two groups of characters. It's also interesting since both groups are on similar paths. They're both have the goals of getting the Stark girls, or two different sets of Stark girls, to safety, or find a girl in the case of Sansa. But of course, more importantly, we are reminded in the case of Arya and the Hound of events from the first season. When Arya brings up Syrio Forel and how he is probably dead. But of course, and this is not a spoiler because I don't know. is the fact that I personally think Syrio Forel is still alive somewhere. The Hound, presents, although it's done ironically, he presents a lot of strong points to prove that maybe he's still alive. Because, of course, he is the greatest swordsman in Bravos, and the Hound kind of mocks the fact that Arya thinks that this guy named Meryn Trant, who the Hound describes as completely useless, could kill the greatest swordsman in Bravos. And although, the Hound is kind of mocking Arya, I think it's a bit of a wink to us, the audience, that maybe Syrio Forel is alive and well. Because if Syrio Forel is the greatest fighter in Bravos, he could easily defeat Meryn Trant with a wooden sword. So I think that's a little hint of what happened to that character. At least that's my hope. I really want him to be alive. He seemed like such a cool guy. What else was there? Again, both scenes are also a bit of a gender bending scenario, since we have Arya, a girl, trying to improve her skills in very traditional male type roles like fighting, whereas Podrick is trying to cook for Brienne, but is failing miserably at something, that we might perceive as something more domestic. And I gotta say, I really like that dynamic. I love the gender bending that goes on in this show. And it's so ironic because it's in like a medieval world where you would think that these gender roles are so heightened. And in a way they are heightened to such a strong degree. But somehow in Game of Thrones, they managed to, I guess, not downplay, but undermine these traditional roles in many ways, which is pretty cool. So the last scene of this episode that I want to talk about is the events north of the Wall. I don't have much to say about events going on there, other than the fact that they were very, very satisfying. We have three bad guys, three bad guys being, quote-unquote bad guys, being killed off finally. We have Locke, who works for the Boltons, being killed by Bran via Hodor. We have Rast the Rapist, gutted by one of the direwolves. And then we have Carl, who's so despicable and evil, who is taking care of Bran via... No, wait. Carl isn't taking care of Bran. He's taking care of Jon Snow with the help of one of Craster's wives. There you go. I was getting a little mixed up in my head. Sorry. Also, one of the most awesome things of this part of the episode was the fact that Jon is finally reunited with Ghost, which was so sweet to see. And I think that this kind of, again, echoes back to the first scene in this, or one of the first scenes in this episode with Daenerys and not having her dragons near her, and how she isn't totally herself. But now we have Jon being a little bit more emotional and likable, and getting the sense that he's a quote-unquote good guy, because now that he's reunited with his mythical direwolf, I feel like there's a sense that he is safe. You know what I mean? He's in a better situation, at least, which personally I really like to see. I will say, though, I wonder what the symbolism of Jojen Reed's hand lighting on fire in front of Carl before the Men of the Night's Watch attack. I mean, maybe it was intended to describe Craster's keep burning down eventually, but maybe it represents something bigger, and if it does, I really wonder what that could be. I don't know what it was, but I will say that within that scene, it was sad that Jon and Bran were so close to being reunited, but sadly it didn't happen. They were so close, yet so far. And of course we have Bran, he's going to go venture north to this tree, this giant weirwood tree, what it looks like anyway, to find this three-eyed raven. And I'm really, really excited to see, what happens there. I think it's going to be some cool new twists that are going to be thrown our way when he reaches that part of the world. So again, I don't want to spoil anything, but it's going to be pretty awesome. Overall, I gotta say this episode did feel a little bit slower than most of the other episodes, but I think it served a purpose. We finally find out what started all these events in the series, like what started the wars, pretty much, and we can blame someone, i.e. Peter Baelish. The Lannisters didn't seem quite as despicable as they normally do in this scene, and I kind of really want to see Tommen become a strong and powerful king one day, because he's so much more likable than freaking Joffrey, that's for damn sure. What else is there to say? I guess overall I would rate this episode maybe like an 8 out of 10. It served a purpose. It was a little slow, but as I guess a midpoint episode for the season, it did kind of allow things to have their conclusions. You know, the events at Craster's Keep have concluded. Certain major bad guys have been killed off, which is nice. And again, even though things are going calmly now, we can't always expect that when it comes to Game of Thrones. So I think that's all for this episode review. I've got a few small things to say. For one thing, I've got my tickets to the Game of Thrones exhibit happening in a couple weeks. I'm really looking forward to that. I hope I am able to make it because I have a few events that I have to go to that are scheduled around the same time as this event, so knock on wood I can make it. If I do make it, I will definitely film, my experience there and post it on YouTube, so by all means check it out when I do that. I have a few other older videos I intend to post that I haven't posted yet, but I will try to get around to that this week. Oh, and also, I got this lovely hat when I went to pick up the tickets because they have a bunch of Game of Thrones paraphernalia that is being sold at the TIFF Bell Lightbox where the exhibit is happening. So if you're in Toronto, go check it out. They have some really cool stuff. I have some more stuff you can check out on my Instagram or my Tumblr page. I'll post a link to those two sites in the info box below. So yeah, that's all for now, folks. I have a lot of other thoughts I want to voice, but of course I can't because this episode review is spoiler free. But if you, again, have read the books and don't mind getting anything spoiled, check out my review with James Johnson and company on Wednesday at 8 p.m. and I will once again post a link to his channel in the info box below. So that is all for today, folks, and without further ado, I hope you enjoyed this review. Like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys again soon, hopefully. Bye.